All right, I got time to knock out another 20 pages. Here we go, starting with page 321. Our goal is to get to page 430. I say at the beginning, the $300,000 whore is Gerald J.R. Olson, the paid government informant, also known as scumbag. All right, Mr. Barney, United States and Audible. One reason, though, they probably just haven't pushed the agenda down our throats. Mr. Cox, I wish they would. Mr. Barney, I know. Mr. Cox, I mean, somebody needs to draw a cartoon of some little mouse with a boulder, you know. Mr. Barney, yeah, down the big roaring lion. Inaudible. Mr. Barney, yeah, but it's so true. It's like Bug's Life. You got all the ants. There's, thousands of ants scared of the 12 grasshoppers that show up, Mr. Cox, $300,000 whore. Yep. Mr. Barney, because if here's 1,000 ants, but if one ant knows that he stands out, there's just going to be him. $300,000 whore. Yeah, I know it. That's what it's come to. Mr. Barney, but I do, just so you know, Schaeffer, I do have a cabin, one of those cabins. I can get one almost ready probably by the end of this week with running water and everything. Inaudible. Mr. Cox, you mean like this coming like... Mr. Barney, yeah, this week Inaudible. Mr. Cox, Inaudible, okay. Mr. Barney, yeah, one of them's, Inaudible, just got to insulate the water line. Mr. Cox, I'm a general contractor. Mr. Barney, well there you go. Mr. Cox, I could do that too. Mr. Barney, you just can't hire a subcontractor to do it. Inaudible. Mr. Cox, yeah, Inaudible, my own truck. Mr. Barney, yeah, they'll go, that's okay, but don't pay me in a check. Mr. Cox, yeah, fraudulent. We're going to pay you in some fraudulent bonds. Mr. Barney, yeah. Mr. Cox, Inaudible, you can take that to the bank when they Inaudible. Okay, well. Mr. Barney, so and there's 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath. Mr. Cox, from the sounds of it, it might be Inaudible. Mr. Barney, yeah. Mr. Cox, we might be out here Monday or Tuesday. $300,000 whore. Next week, first part of the week, yeah. Mr. Cox, anything else? I just didn't want to cut you off. I just want to... Mr. Barney, no. Mr. Cox, hear you out. Mr. Barney, Mr. Cox, and get your thoughts in. Mr. Barney, yeah, no. I just want to let you know that that's available, so that way, that if Inaudible, you back and forth or whatever until it sounds like you were telling me a little bit about what $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Barney, an option was, but that's we need more people to help us do what, we're not going to be able to stand against them. That's an audible chance, and even though we're not even going to be martyrs in the eyes of the public, $300,000 whore. Not right away, eventually we will. Mr. Cox, eventually, yeah, $300,000 whore. It'll be too late by then, yeah. There's another prodding by Olson. That's another prodding. It'll be too late by then. Mr. Cox, who cares? $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, well, Inaudible, you idiot, you told them this, didn't you? Inaudible, even big old statue of George Washington, who's Inaudible tax money and it's all patented. $300,000 whore. Yeah, I know it. Mr. Barney, the irony, huh? But I think Mr. Cox, Inaudible. Mr. Barney, I honestly think that as discouraging as a lot of these things we're seeing happen are, I honestly believe that we're living in it's scary and discouraging, but it's also exciting times. And like you said, I watched a YouTube of you a long time ago about it, and some of the stuff when you were out in Montana talking, you were talking about where you get dropped off in the woods. Mr. Cox, I got a lot of, every time I go and give speeches, they always, Mr. Barney, yeah, Mr. Cox, wind up on YouTube. Mr. Barney, well, that's because when I saw you were talking about where you went trapping out there and they abandoned. Mr. Cox, 2 guys out there, yeah, well, Mr. Barney, didn't you hear it, JR? $300,000 whore. No, I haven't heard it. Mr. Cox, a guy threw me out there into a cabin and dropped me off out there, and he went to Hawaii. $300,000 whore. Oh, really? Mr. Cox, and he told his buddy to come pick me up, and his buddy couldn't come, and because of the weather, and then inaudible weather again, and then the guy came back from Hawaii, and like, well, he'll go get him. They both thought the other one got me. $300,000 whore. Oh, really? Mr. Cox, man, I was out there for December, January, February, March, April, inaudible. $300,000 whore. Oh, man. And no one was concerned? Your parents or... Mr. Cox, no, I was already left home by then. $300,000 whore. Oh, yeah? Mr. Cox, I was 16. I been working down commercial fishing, and $300,000 whore. So they didn't... Mr. Cox, as long as I come back in winter, inaudible back then, and $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, and I remember those words ringing in my head because my mom goes, well, how long are you going to be out there? I was like, oh, I don't know. If it's trapping... If trapping's good, a real long time. $300,000 whore. Oh, man. Mr. Cox, moron, give her a number. $300,000 whore. Wow. So what they finally just happened to come fishing? Mr. Cox, oh, just so, did that guy ever get into any furs out there in the Yukon Flats? Oh, I don't know. You picked him up, didn't you? No. $300,000 whore. Oh, man. Mr. Cox, so inaudible the plane. $300,000 whore. Oh, man. Mr. Cox, anyway, you were saying? Mr. Barney, well, your whole thought on that inaudible is that, the whole time you're out there, you're thinking, man, life sucks, my life sucks, I don't want to be here, my life sucks, and this can't be in a worse circumstances. And then you said, and one thing you got out of it is you're never where you want to be until you're where you want to be where you are. Mr. Cox, you never where you to be until you're inaudible where you are. Mr. Barney, yeah, and I thought, that's $300,000 whore. Wow, yeah. Mr. Barney, that's where we're at right now. $300,000 whore. Yep. Mr. Barney, and we can feel like we've been kicked in the mouth, or we can realize that God put us down on earth at this time for a reason. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, yeah. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Wow. Mr. Cox, I want to be here. Mr. Barney, yeah. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Barney. But I think we're going to see some horrid things, but at last we see some miracles. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, yeah, well, a couple of things here I'll just run over. Not to go over big time, but APM is kind of a family militia. And, inaudible big Rambos, those guys that want to go, defeat the world, I think he's talking about Aaron Bennett and Bill Fulton, and they made that inaudible. The reason I say that is I remember Schaeffer telling me when it said big Rambos, he said Aaron Bennett and Bill Fulton. We'll have to go try to find the audio and see if we can make it out ourselves. Mr. Barney, yeah. Mr. Cox. And APM as well, like guys like us. Mr. Barney, yeah. Mr. Cox. And we've all got a lot to lose and a lot to fight for, but $300,000 whore. At the same time, yeah. Mr. Barney, yeah. Mr. Cox, and so, we've got our families and, businesses, and we've got achievements and everybody like that, and that's what we primarily care about. And so I think any decisions that we make needs to be about that. Wow, does that sound like the words of somebody who's fixing to go on a mass murdering spree? Mr. Barney, Mr. Cox, because I'm not interested in to go in and kill, wicked people who deserve it, and who it's definitely, if we all shook hands and went out of here to go roll judges' heads, we're definitely morally justified. He said he's not interested to go kill people. Wow, that's I need to get that one on tape. Mr. Barney, yep. $300,000 whore, yep. Mr. Cox, to do it. They're not even government, Mr. Cox, yep. $300,000 whore, yep. Mr. Cox, it won't be any different than if we put the banditos came in here. That's what it is. Mr. Barney, yeah. Mr. Cox, but I'm not motivated by wanting to see their heads roll. I'm motivated by wanting my family to live free and prosperous and happy. $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Cox, inaudible life, and so we need to keep that in mind And then that brings us to the other thing, is the difference between a war and a fight. All right, we're all willing to, and then it says dash dash for a war. Okay, but that's different than looking for a fight. And with what you're talking about for the 241 and stuff like that, meaning just a gesture, that's looking for a fight. Now, if you're just all is lost and all you can do is make it on a if all you can do is make it bargain for them, so then maybe they'll slow down on the next guy. There's nothing wrong with that, Mr. Barney. Yeah, Mr. Cox, as a final thing, but we need to think about the war and not just about the fight. And so I believe that at this point, with the socio-economic dynamics that we've got right now, something along the lines of 241 and any sort of very aggressive offensive maneuver is probably, you can't say what's inaudible. It seems like to me, given the circumstances, that would be more along the lines of looking for a fight rather than strategically and prudently waging a war. Wow, it sounds like he rejected the 241 plan yet again. Mr. Barney, inaudible. Mr. Cox, and so we need to think about the war. $300,000 whore. Hey, now. Why is the $300,000 whore speaking up? You think he's thinking that he don't want him to say anything that's going to cause him to lose his $300,000? Mr. Cox, and we need inaudible war. I don't know what the word inaudible, we can just put our imagination on what might have been said. $300,000 whore. What happens when they start grabbing us one by one, If they were to swoop in, say they were to swoop in, take Lonnie, take you guys, charge you with all kinds of federal crimes, We're looking at crimes of 20 years. Well, you think that $300,000 whore is incentivized by wanting to set Cox up by what he just said? Does it sound like he's entrapping Cox? Does it sound like he's prodding him to violence? It sure sounded that way to me. Mr. Cox, well, and that's what $300,000 whore. And I'm left out here, Ken and I and a few of these other guys are left out here, and we know our number's next. It'll just be a matter of time before they come in, and then what initiates the 241? Wow, that's like prodding number 42 from the $300,000 whore. He's asking again, what initiates the 241 plan? What if I'm left out here all alone, Schaeffer? Mr. Cox, when avoiding capture, allowing them to, okay, I'll tell you, I'll show you. Here's why time's on our side. Okay. Because by avoiding capture, they run out of money. They lose more credibility. People begin to hurt. All of those things, everything as this advances is tipping the scale in our favor. Now, did that sound like Schaeffer jumped up and gave Olson, $300,000 whore, an answer to the 241 question and let's go kill him? No, he didn't say that at all. He said let's just avoid capture and that'll cost him some money. $300,000 whore. Mr. Cox, all right. So 241, in my estimation, was only valid when the option of somehow allowing that scale to continue slowly tipping in our favor is totally out of the question and not doable. When that, Mr. Olson, Mr. Cox, when that by allowing the scale to keep tipping, it's out of reach and our only choice is to either go down quiet or go down costing them. That's when 241 comes in. Mr. Olson, okay. Mr. Cox, so right now, Mr. Olson, yeah. Now let me just pause right here and say that he didn't say, if you listen to what Cox said, he didn't say let's go do 241 in any time, way, shape, or form with any sort of eminence. He basically said if it's our only option, what was his exact words? All right, so 241 in my estimation was only valid. It uses past tense, was only valid, when the option of somehow allowing that scale to continue slowly tipping in our favor is totally out of the question and not doable. Okay, let me also say this. Schaeffer has told me that he knew that Olson would go run into Bill Fulton and tell Bill Fulton if Schaeffer completely rejected 241 and said it would never ever be a plan ever they would consider. And that Fulton had made death threat ultimatums that if if Schaeffer didn't act in violence, that Fulton would go on a killing spree. And you say, well, that's crazy. You need to listen to what happened when Fulton recorded himself in a hotel room about telling Gerald J.R. Olson to go remember how he almost killed Les Zerbe. And so what Schaeffer is doing here is what he told me in an email from prison, is he said he's not completely rejecting 241 as completely out of the question ever in any way, shape, or form, because he's buying time. He's playing for time because he wants to get out of Dodge, and guess what? He wants to get away from Bill Fulton and Aaron Bennett, who were trying to kill him. And he knew that if he was to tell Gerald J.R. Olson, well, I just don't want to ever do 241, ever, no matter what, that Gerald J.R. Olson would go run and tell Bill Fulton, and that would provoke Bill Fulton into a killing spree. So nowhere does Schaeffer ever accept the 241 plan as a viable, imminent plan. It's always, well, if we don't have any other option, some plan way far off, and you don't put somebody in prison, on something that is never ever going to happen at some point in the future under circumstances that are never reachable or never imminent. Anyway, let's keep reading. It's absolutely absurd how they've entrapped Schaeffer over and over and over again and continued to prod him. $300,000 whore, okay? Mr. Cox, so I mean right now, $300,000 whore, yeah? Mr. Cox, Lonnie's losing his house. Today I lost my house. Honestly, Mr. Barney, Mr. Cox, that's what's happened. $300,000 whore, Mr. Cox, I lost my house, my business, my whole fortune, because that's okay, and I could if I was looking for a fight, and if I was feeling vengeful. And what's wrong with feeling vengeful, man? We've been wronged. I could go out and I could sock it to him, and that would satisfy my animalistic reaction to their inaudible righteous wrath, though it may be. $300,000 whore. Mr. Cox. But it would be a detriment to the war. And so because I believe you, that me losing everything and just walking away from it, get me back to your friend's container, get smuggled through Canada with nothing but a gym bag and a rifle, and we lose everything and let the scales keep tipping. That's what I think has the brightest future for my family. Wow. Did that sound like the words of someone who's planning to go murder anybody? Didn't sound like the words of somebody who's planning to murder anybody to me. Sounds like all he wants to do is get the hell away from Bill Fulton, get the hell away from the situation, and get the hell out of Alaska. $300,000 whore. Mr. Cox. Because only when there is no future and there is no hope for my wife and for my children can I then spend myself only in costing. $300,000 whore. Mr. Cox, the enemy. Mr. Barney. Mr. Cox. Because costing the enemy is not my objective. Wow, listen to that. Because costing the enemy is not my objective. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. $300,000 whore, yeah. Mr. Cox, I would forgive them and have all sorts of redemption and go to a picnic with them if they'd leave me alone. Wow, let me read that again. Let's read the domestic terrorist that got sent to prison for 26 years. And Eric Holder even had a steak dinner for the prosecutors and the Department of Justice and the FBI for bringing this domestic terrorist to justice and putting him in prison for 26 years. Let's read what he has to say when he's being recorded and he doesn't know that anybody's listening. He just thinks his two friends are listening. He doesn't know that one of them is a paid government informant. What does he have to say when he thinks that nobody is listening? And he thinks it's a private conversation. Let's read it again. Because costing the enemy is not my objective. Paid government informant, $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, I would forgive them and have all sorts of redemption and go to a picnic with them if they'd leave me alone. Wow, doesn't sound like the words of a mass murdering domestic terrorist to me. $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Cox, I don't have hatred towards them. Wow, he doesn't even hate the people who've taken away his business, his family, have ruined his good name, have threatened to kill him, and have threatened to take away his children. He's a better man than me. You know what he says? He says, I don't have hatred towards them. My. Wow. I can't even imagine that somebody would be that righteous. My. Mr. Barney, Mr. Cox. But I was, certainly, crack one off between their arms if it was going to save my family. Wow, if it was going to save my family. If it was going to save my family, you would be justified in shooting one off. You know what I mean? But he's saying he's not going to do that. Mr. Olson, yeah, Mr. Cox. But if it's only going to satisfy my angry bloodlust, then that is keeping inaudible on my family and on your families. And that's not who we can be. We're the family militia. My. $300,000 whore. Yeah, but at what? Here we go again. I love it. It's another prodding from that $300,000 whore, because the $300,000 whore don't like what he just heard. He sees his $300,000 slipping away. He sees his own self being put back in prison because he's unable to take down the great Schaeffer Cox. So let's listen to what the $300,000 whore has to say to what he just heard. $300,000 whore. Yeah, but at what point, at what point do we determine those scales aren't being tipped? If they're dissecting us one at a time or two at a time, and what do we do, Schaeffer? Mr. Cox, well, I guess that's the $1 billion question, isn't it? Mr. Barney, yeah. $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Barney, inaudible. $300,000 whore, inaudible. Mr. Cox, are we waiting until it's too late, just like everybody else? $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Cox. Or are we running out ahead of the scale and sacrificing ourselves prematurely? $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Cox, inaudible. $300,000 whore. Yeah, that's a Mr. Cox, inaudible. $300,000 whore. Tough part. Mr. Cox, and I believe that $300,000 whore. That's the tough part. Mr. Cox, that at least right now, and I can't speak to the future, but I can say that I think for right now, a 241 would be running out ahead of the scale and sacrificing ourselves to no avail. Rejected! Boom! Shakalaka goes right there. Schaeffer yet again rejects the 241 plan and says that it would be running out ahead of the scale and sacrificing ourselves to no avail. Mr. Barney. And it would be $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Barney. It would be a very short 241. $300,000 whore. It would, yeah. Mr. Barney, inaudible. $300,000 whore. We'd be done, Mr. Barney, inaudible. $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Cox, inaudible. $300,000 whore. Wouldn't be able just to keep coming and give them two, yeah, Mr. Barney. And I think, and $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Barney. That our troops, and that's the scale starting to tip when they see more people that start to wake up and come to our aid. And even if they still have greater numbers, there'll be a point to where even with guerrilla warfare and stuff like that, 2-for-1 becomes a real possibility at that point. Now that was Mr. Barney that said that. $300,000 whore. Deterrent, yeah. Mr. Barney, because you actually have enough people on your side that you can inaudible for a while. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Barney, I mean, at that point, and if it gets to the point, $300,000 whore. See, I think they're going to hide. They're going to be working all they can to present it to get to that point. By coming in. Mr. Barney, by eliminating leaders. $300,000 whore. Yeah, eliminating leaders, coming in and taking them one by one or two at a time. And before we know it, you're going to be looking around and we're going to say, hey, all of our leaders are gone, And so we step up to be a leader and we're gone, so they're moving. Mr. Barney, inaudible. $300,000 whore. Yeah, they just bleed you out one drop at a time. Mr. Cox, well, and that's why my scramble was inaudible, tied to me up in court. $300,000 whore. Yeah, that's what they're doing. Mr. Cox, inaudible, basically, but my goal, I guess, I haven't thought about it, but my subconscious goal was to be able, was to get prepared to execute a 2-for-1 that needed to be, I think that it needs three more things here. Okay, we need it. It needs to be sustainable, like you said. $300,000 whore. Yeah, Mr. Cox. We've got to actually be able to keep it up. There has to be more public pain so that when we do it, people will be like, oh, good for him, you know. $300,000 whore. Maybe they're doing something. Mr. Cox, you know, $300,000 whore. Here, something right. Mr. Cox, we're getting close to that. Remember when the guy flew his airplane into the IRS building? I remember that. $300,000 whore. Yeah, and all the blogs and all the whole clan were like, $300,000 whore. Inaudible loved it. Mr. Cox, right on, man. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, you're a hero. $300,000 whore. You done what I wanted to do. Mr. Cox, woo. $300,000 whore for years. Yeah, yeah. Mr. Cox, yeah, okay, we're getting close to that. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, you know, $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, and that was a very, you know, oh, the brownies were almost done, you know. $300,000 whore. Yeah, yeah. Mr. Cox, that was a beautiful moment, and so we need more public pain. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, in order to, $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, because if we did it now, everybody and their brother will turn us right in. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, we need people that are going to cover for you, do their little inaudible chickens, but they'll hatch somehow. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Cox, and then we just need more numbers. Mr. Olson, yeah. Mr. Cox, I mean, we're only looking at a few, so I think 2-for-1 is two things. We got to be ready for it, and there has to be, I mean, not for inaudible, not the predisposition to, well, I don't know, inaudible judgment, just a few minutes inaudible, in the general inaudible. $300,000 whore. Yeah. Mr. Barney. Uh-huh. All right, I'm going to stop here on page 341. In closing of this, I want to state two things. Schaeffer never accepts 2-for-1 as an imminent plan. It's always the only reason he even discusses it, and keep in mind that $300,000 whore had the ability to start and stop his recorder. And not only that, but Schaeffer always talks about it needs several things and conditions that never were met. And then not only that, but Schaeffer could not just outright reject 2-for-1 because Gerald J.R. Olson would go talk to Bill Fulton, and Bill Fulton would go on a killing spree just like he threatened to do. And so there's several things at play here. The bottom line is that Schaeffer Cox always rejected 2-for-1 as an imminent plan. He never accepted it. The only reason he would even talk about it at the constantly bringing it up from Gerald J.R. Olson was under certain conditions that were never met and could never be met. It would be basically a failure of the United States government, which in those cases, if you did have a failure of the money supply, a failure of social breakdown, a failure of WRAL, without rule of law, if you had that sort of situation, then anything is fair game, right? Because you have no law, right? And so Schaeffer is not talking about killing people, right? And it's obvious to anybody with any sort of common sense whatsoever. But we'll pick up with page 341 when I get time later.